Hey there, Internet friends. Trevor Starkey here with another episode of Trevor Trove Gaming, Sunday edition, where I kind of talk about the big news of the week. And the story I'm kind of going to latch onto this week that came out of GDC is this kind of, it's an ongoing story, but effectively the root of it is that indies are thriving on the Switch. And you often hear stories about indies kind of coming out on the Switch and then announcing that they've, made the biggest sales of any other system kind of there when they launch on the Switch. And, that's great, of course, but I think it's also misrepresenting the success of indies on the Switch, because we're only getting that from like a few indies. And in pretty much every case I've heard of, it's almost always indies that are already did well on other systems, and this is just a new launch for them. Examples would be like Death Squared. I know Oceanhorn kind of made a big deal that when they came out, they sold the most of any system on the Switch. And so, especially during the early days of the Switch, that made sense that, you didn't have too much in the way of first or third-party support out there, so it really was in between big Nintendo launches, really thriving off of the indie games that were coming in. And so any indie game that had any kind of, like, notoriety coming into it was, people were hungry to play those games. And so something like Oceanhorn can come out and people are like, oh, I've heard other people talk about Oceanhorn. It's a Zelda-like game. Yeah, I'm gonna finally dive in to play Oceanhorn. But you have, 10 other games that probably came out alongside Oceanhorn that nobody touched, nobody, gave a second thought. And I think that's what gets overlooked, is that you have the exact same issue that's going on the Sony side of things or the Microsoft side of things, in that these indies are coming out, dozens of indies each week, but nobody's playing them. The only ones that really kind of catch people's eyes are the ones that had already caught people's eyes to begin with, or are the ones that, like Celeste, that come out and they're critically praised and everybody loves it, and it does well on every platform it's on. So I think too often, we're looking at those, crazy examples of the Oceanhorns or the golf stories that kind of come out, and not looking at the other 10 games that came out that week, which is, again, the same issue you see on PlayStation. I don't think either of those are anywhere near the level of stuff you have to sift through in Steam, but I do think that the only real thing that the Switch has going for it that maybe PlayStation doesn't is that the indies competition on Switch is still largely only first-party Nintendo stuff. Third-party outside of, Bethesda and a little bit of EA really isn't coming in there and kind of competing with them. So, on PlayStation or Xbox, you have Far Cry coming out this week alongside whatever indies are coming out this week. But on Switch, you don't have the Far Cry factor, the third-party factor, the Ubisoft factor, all that much. I mean, you do have a couple Ubisoft kind of titles that have come in there, but largely the Switch is made up of Nintendo first-party stuff and Nindies. And so those Nindies are, maybe getting a little bit of an extra boost, but you're also seeing them on a system that has, probably a fifth of the install base of a PlayStation. And admittedly, people might not be playing those kinds of games on their PlayStation. Personally, I still pick up the indies on PlayStation because I'm already so, invested in that ecosystem, and I don't play my Switch all that much outside of, the big first-party stuff. I just don't have enough of a desire to play it on the go. Maybe, I'll take it to PAX East with me in a couple weeks, but for the most part, I just kind of don't pick it up, even though I've got it, right next to my bed. It's just not there in my hands in the way that it is in other people's. But that's getting away from the point. So the crux of the argument that I'm trying to kind of pose here is that I think people kind of pitch, when is the oversaturation point on the Switch? And I think we've already hit that. I think we hit that a year ago. Maybe not a year ago. 6 months ago, we hit that when we did start seeing as many games come to the Switch every week as we do see on, the PlayStation Network. And the only reason that the Switch examples really get a little bit of boost is because that it's people finally pulling the trigger on games that they've already heard about on every other platform, like your Oceanhorns. If people hadn't picked up Oceanhorn on the PlayStation or on the original mobile, they'd heard about it and said, finally, I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot here on Switch because I have nothing else to play on Switch. So I think that's really the only thing setting Switch sales above and beyond, is because people who have the Switch are hungry to play games because they don't have as wide of a variety of offerings as you have on an Xbox or a PS4, because you don't have the big third-party titles coming in and kind of supporting the first-party work. You have the first-party ecosystem, the third-party ecosystem, and the indies ecosystem, and save Bethesda for the most part, you have one of those completely cut out on the Nintendo ecosystem. So of course you're going to get a little bit more leverage on the indie side on the Switch, but I don't think it's noticeable. I don't think it's sizable so much as like we hear or we see the stories coming in. Because again, I think we end up focusing on the one or two positives at the expense of all of the other indies that are getting lost in the shuffle just like everything else. So those are my thoughts. That's what I wanted to talk about this week. It's an argument I don't hear ever really kind of come up, and so it's one that I wanted to voice because it's something I've been feeling about for a long time, certainly. And so with kind of the indie push on the Switch being such a dominant story coming out of GDC, I thought this was finally a good time to really look into it and tackle it and address it. So those are my thoughts on indies on the Switch. Not to say, if you're playing indies on the Switch that, I detest you or something like that. Of course not. Play where you want to play, but I think people are over projecting the actual success of indies on the Switch. So I wanted to talk about that. So let me know what your thoughts are in this kind of whole space in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Trevor, from TrevorTrove.com. You can follow me at SnarkyStarky on Twitter. And until next time, from here at the Trove, treasure your friends.